Hey, it's State of State. We got your Nittany Line update. It's a football discussion with Tom and Justin, so kick back and press play.
With former Penn State and NFL defensive back Justin King, I'm Tom Hannafin. This is State of State. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Follow us on social media at State of State Pod. Comment on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. For just 99 cents a month, you can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast. State of State is presented by BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. With the largest selection of odds on everything from the NBA to college basketball to the NHL and UFC, BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every three-pointer to hat tricks, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. State of State is presented by BetOnline. The game starts here. State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. Check out their Lockdown U and Lawn Boys merchandise today. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Also, official State of State merchandise is available now. Support the show and grab State of State t-shirts, hoodies, hats, and more. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today. Hi, everyone, and welcome to State of State. I'm Tom Hannafin. He's Justin King. A lot of coaching staff movement in the past few weeks for Penn State football. A lot of people have been talking, of course, about Jim Knowles being hired as a defensive coordinator, but there's certainly been a ripple effect, whether some of these things are related. Some are certain, some are not, but we're going to dive into all of that here. The biggest one recently was Jaywan Seider, Penn State's running backs coach, is now officially off to Notre Dame to take on the same role for the Fighting Irish. So that is a tough one to swallow for Penn State football fans, having just lost to Notre Dame in the semifinal of the college football playoff. But ultimately, we here on State of State are hoping the best for Ja'Juan Seider and a good opportunity for him and his family. Justin, you know Seider quite well. You understand what he meant to the program over 7 years. For him to be with Penn State football 2018 to 2025, you just don't see runs like that anymore with position coaches in college football. What did Ja'Juan Seider mean to you? What type of coach is he? What type of man is he, in your opinion?
I mean, can't say enough. I mean, he left his imprint on Penn State from just the recruiting scene and the running backs that has come through there. But you know, he's always had a presence in helping Penn State have a presence in Florida, right? When we talk about just recruiting nationally and things of that nature, coming from Florida, being from Florida, always had our presence down there and bringing guys up. And I think just like our exposure from a Penn State program has expanded from his recruiting efforts. Obviously, developing players, always having guys ready to go, and he just has this way of molding guys into just better versions of themselves, right? I would say tougher versions of themselves. And it's cool to see. I mean, anytime a coach moves up in their career. So kudos and good luck to Jaywan.
There were some indications that from a family standpoint, it made sense for Seider to stay put in State College as long as he did. And credit to coaches that are able to do that. You don't see that too often, that coaches can kind of call their shot and establish themselves. Terry Smith is a guy that jumps to mind as somebody who really seems like he's in it for the long haul and is a Penn State lifer. So when you have that stability for you and your family, it's fantastic. But Seider had been entertaining other opportunities this entire time that he'd been with Penn State, not saying every other cycle, but he'd been looked at by a bunch of different programs. At one point, he was the co-offensive coordinator, the back end of the 2023 season. He was a co-offensive coordinator, or assistant head coach, a co-offensive coordinator in title. So it obviously gained more responsibility. How difficult is this going to be for James Franklin to find a replacement that is as good as Seider or better?
I mean, I think we spoke, I feel like it's a broken record of just James's ability to fill in those spots on the coaching staff. He had a little excerpt where he said he's not looking for a developing coach, or he's not looking for an old guy. So, I mean, it sounds like he's having his criteria in place. So therefore, like, it kind of zeroes in on that list. And so I think he probably has an idea who's going to roll with, and I think he'll do a good job at that too.
Very quickly, there was a story out there about Demir Shaw at Rutgers, the running backs coach, getting an extension through 2027, getting more money. So maybe Penn State kicked the tires there, or was at least thinking about kicking the tires there. So some things going off the board. One thing fans are worried about, and you touched on the recruiting presence that Jaywan Seider has been extremely valuable as a recruiter. Messiah Mickens is a commit for 2026. Keemon Spell is a recruit that's a commit for 2027, both running backs. Mickens did post something on social media saying, my guy, in response to Seider leaving the program. Any concern on your part of Mickens or Spell potentially dropping off now after this, considering what Seider's able to be and what that relationship can be?
No, I believe even Penn State, I know coaches matter and your position coach matters, but they've had levels of stability from just a program standpoint. I think that people that are selecting to come to Penn State are coming to Penn State for the whole shebang, and not just for one coach. So I think they stay, and I think it also will be some value to who James brings in, right? I think that person will have a lot to do with them staying and feeling comfortable coming up in the state.
You mentioned it, but James Franklin spoke with the media earlier on this week and said this is maybe the best running backs coach job in America, considering the personnel that are there right now. Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, sure, but you've got great depth with Cam Wallace and Quentin Martin Jr. and Corey Smith, Tyquee Hayes. You've got a lot of other guys coming in as a part of this class of 2025. The names I just mentioned that are potentially down the pike for 26 and 27. Hard to argue with him. It's a damn good running back, period. The interesting thing I think that he talked about was getting Nick Singleton and Katron Allen to come back to Penn State for 2025. Granted, that was done a little while ago. That was really before the playoff got underway, that we knew that was going to happen. The value that these two guys have of being in the same backfield at the same time, both 1,000-yard rushers, splitting the load, you're saving your body for the pro ranks, but you're also saving your body for Penn State football and making sure that both guys can contribute. The one interesting point James Franklin brought up, and I'm curious if you had this experience at all in your time as a player, is that he said going into this offseason is the first time Katron Allen has been, quote unquote, healthy for an offseason cycle. Did you ever have an offseason where you were, quote unquote, healthy, or felt like, pretty much okay? And what is that like versus an offseason where you're rehabbing from something significant?
No, that's actually a pretty significant piece in just the longevity of players in general, whether it's in high school or college, because like you go through the season, you have your end of the year meeting with the coach, and then you go work on fixing those things that you need to improve on, whether it's your blocking, whether it's your deep ball skills, whatever those things are. And you always have gaps to fill within your skill development, right? You cannot do that if you're physically beat up. That's why they say in the NFL, the best ability is availability, is for that reason. Is it's like, hey, when you're hurt, you got to have other guys and things of that nature to jump in there. So, I mean, it's a pretty huge deal. One, to continue to become better as a football player and to stay healthy as a player, but like just to continue to get better, just at your skills, reading and doing different things of that nature. Like you have to play the game. And I've experienced that in the NFL. A lot of my off seasons were riddled with injuries where I had to, put the scarecrow back together again before even starting to train, versus getting into the off season somewhat healthy, do your rehab a little bit, and then really filling in those gaps. That's how you continuously drive your value as a sports asset. So injuries do have become a big obstacle in the offseason when that happens.
Especially when the goal is potentially to win a national championship in 2025. And, I mentioned Jim Knowles. There's a ripple effect of this. There's some people out there that are speculating, well, you spent $3.1 million on average per year over a 3-year deal for Jim Knowles. Oh, Seider's a casualty of that. It's kind of hard to make that argument because he's seen the influx of coaches that Knowles has had, and we'll get to that in terms of Gattuso and some defensive line analysts that he's brought on. So it's like that addition by subtraction, it probably all balances out, to be honest, but didn't necessarily feel like, well, we brought in Knowles, so we lose Seider, that sort of thing. And if you have to play that game, that's something James Franklin inevitably had to weigh. So only he knows that. But Jim Knowles, when he did his introductory press conference, I didn't even get to talk to you about this, is that Jim Knowles said his goal now at his point in his career is to win a national championship at Penn State and to have the number one defense in the country. To my knowledge, under James Franklin at Penn State, if anybody openly talks about like winning a Big Ten title, making the playoff, or winning a national championship, the next thing you hear is James Franklin being like, I'm going to have a talk with that guy. Like, we're going to snuff that out, right? It's the 1-0 mentality. This was one of the first instances that I can remember of a member of the existing staff outwardly saying, like, yeah, I'm here to win a national title. Are you okay with that? How do you think James feels about that? Like, granted, Jim Knowles just showed up, so it's like, what are you going to tell him? But like, that's different.
Because he's done it. I mean, I don't think anybody else has done it. So like, you can't say it when it's just like, really, hey, I'm here to do this. And it's like, you've never done shit. So like, be quiet. Like, let's not bring different pressure into this team that doesn't need. But like, if you're bringing somebody in that has won a national championship, hell yeah, they're here to help us win a national championship. Let's listen to what he got to say. So yeah, he's won a national championship. So I think that puts him in a different category.
But do you expect to continue to hear that type of talk? Not necessarily from Knowles.
I hope so.
You know, do you think that permeates?
Confidence is contagious, especially authentic confidence. So yeah, I do expect that to stick around. If that's why he left his job at Ohio State to become the highest paid defensive coordinator, you know, talent equals tolerance when it comes to coaches as well.
One thing I think is interesting, I'm curious to see what happens for Penn State's defensive line going into 2025. You and I talked about it, is that historically, has Jim Knowles run a 4-man front? Yes. Could he potentially stick with Penn State's 4-2-5? Yes, but we don't know. Does he prefer a 3-man front? He has said that many times. So could he go to a 3-4 or a 3-3-5? We don't know. He could. We got to find out. We'll see how everything plays out the next few months. There is now this influx of coaches along the defensive line specifically. Now, Deion Barnes is still the defensive line coach, but the addition of Greg Gattuso is a big add as, I believe it's defensive line consultant or analyst. I can't remember the exact terminology, but you have a familiarity with Gattuso. What skill set does he bring?
I mean, anytime you bring in a former head coach, I mean, he's been a head coach at multiple different places, and a successful defensive line coach that played at a high level, a wealth of knowledge that you can't really speak to, but it's great. I mean, it's a great development tool for Deion Barnes as a coach. It's great for that defense. Is overall is good for, I mean, the program. Yeah, I have a little history. Coach Gattuso was my first coach that I worked for as a ball boy, 8 years old, at Duquesne University. He was the head coach of a lot of things that I learned, even from like, hey, head coach expectations and seeing how assistants are dealing with recruits. I mean, he was like the first person that I saw that in a football building with. So it's cool to see a full circle of him coming to Penn State, former Penn State guy as well. But I think that's a great addition to the staff. And I think, again, when he adds a running back coach, it'll be the same ilk.
Never hurts to continue to add lettermen to this staff. I think that's been a really cool thing. Along the defensive line, also had the addition of Andrew Jackson, a defensive line analyst. He was West Virginia's defensive line coach the last 4 years, helped West Virginia rank /1 in the Big 12 in sacks in 2023. Coming in, this could be a one-season stop potentially. But now you have what appears to be 4 different coaches / consultants, whatever it is you want to call them, and Deion Barnes, Jackson, Gattuso, and Torrance Brown covering the defensive line. Why do you think that many people are necessary for one position group? Or is that just kind of like, hey, it's the preference in the new DC?
Did you watch the Super Bowl?
I did. As an Eagles fan, that I did. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Collect big people and coach those big people, man. You have those defensive linemen. It's a neutralizing position, and the keys to victory when you think of football. I have a philosophy, like I said, collect big people, but especially defensive linemen can do special things when you have 4 guys that you can rush and stop the run, and have 7 guys in coverage and blitz however you want. It's investing in a defensive line is extremely critical, and it's hard to find defensive line coaches because they're more akin to like martial arts coaches, right? Like it's not just a raw guy is not going to get the job done at defensive line. Like it's a technical job where you're, constantly developing, and that's one of those positions where, yeah, you have to technically get better. So if you're injured or if you're not big enough and you're not physically developing, you have to make sure that you're working on technique. So if you have a whole bunch of teachers that are working on the guys, and we already know what they can do from a recruiting standpoint, Deion Barnes has shown that. Coach Gattuso is responsible for Aaron Donald, Burst that came from Albany to Florida State. So, I mean, he has his own pedigree. I mean, I think that it's a great look. And then again, not even mentioning Coach Knowles coming into the picture.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see what this defensive line could be. Would you think there'd be any issue with that? Like, not saying Deion Barnes takes it personally, but you go from being like, oh, I like under James Franklin, I'm the head coach of the defensive line. Now it's like, there's a lot of people in this room that are talking to my guys.
I mean, if we're all trying to get to the right outcome, I think the more brains, the better, especially if we're all clear on where everybody aligns, right? I think when you come in and you're the defensive line coach, I think it's clear that the analysts, regardless of how much experience they do have, that they help. A lot of coaches, when they first get hired, they bring in a veteran coach to help guide the way. I think he would probably view it from that standpoint. No, I think it's going to work out very well.
Another little note here: Penn State defensive end Amin Vanover, he shifted his focus towards NFL draft preparation. This is per Tyler Donahue. His NCAA eligibility waiver was denied, so Amin Vanover does not have a chance to come back to college football. That would have been great. It seemed like he was done, period. His eligibility was up, but at least making that attempt. You mentioned the Super Bowl, and I think especially that defense that the Eagles put out there, kind of applying it to what Penn State has. You talked about how, getting home with 4 is incredibly important. If you can do that, it frees up so many other things within your secondary. But it also asks a lot more of your linebackers. It asks a lot more of certain pieces of your secondary to be able to handle guys that are built like tight ends, for instance. And like, how many times did you see Cooper DeJean lined up across from Travis Kelce? So you look at Penn State's linebackers and secondary, that lion position, the jack position, sometimes as Jim Knowles is calling pass within his defenses. If anything, it feels like Penn State has great personnel along its defensive line to pick up where it left off from last season. But are there particular guys at linebacker and maybe it's safety that you're like, hey, these are guys that are going to need to take a step here, because in order to have that type of defense that the Eagles fielded, for instance, where you get home with 4 and you can drop, you need to see a maturation process occur sooner rather than later?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I think you just want to see Zaki coming back from a safety standpoint, like making certain plays. I mean, just the normal participants that had been playing last year. I think just seeing that uptick in their development would be great. And it's hard, to be completely honest, in this landscape of just which players are going to be available and not, like when it comes down to that time. So, I mean, I'm just interested to see when spring ball happens and see who starts to show up.
James Franklin also mentioning it earlier on this week, there will be less winter workouts, 8 down to 6. Part of that is because of the amount of time you spent in the college football playoff.
There's only 6?
That's what he said earlier on this week.
Oh, that's awesome.
Well, I mean, think about it. The season went from, like, for some teams, it ended the last week in November. Penn State's ran into January. So
ooh, I could do 6. I could possibly do 6. I mean, that's not bad.
So I don't know if you got to see it, but basically he's like, we don't want to sacrifice the work of winter workouts and of spring ball. He's like, we don't want to sacrifice the work because there are guys that are, for instance, brand new to the program that it's like, you're going to do everything. And then there's guys that are maybe seniors that have been there forever, and you know what they are, or they're coming off the playoff run and they just need to rest and recover and, rehabilitate, all that sort of stuff. So he said we're going to evaluate everybody. And it's going to be a case by case basis. So it sounds like, as always, James Franklin has a very analytical approach to that. But there's so much discussion now about what should spring ball look like. The second transfer portal window may be going away at some point in the future, but that's looming. What does the spring game itself look like? Matt Rule from Nebraska has complained about that openly. For you as a player, what would you prefer in terms of winter workouts? I have a feeling I know which way you're going to go, but then also spring ball.
I mean, you don't do winter workouts in the NFL, but I understand it's a different time, and you're building up your body in a different way. So I think there is some value to the load that you get done in winter workouts. I understand the psychology and the shared hardship of waking up at 5 o'clock and trekking through Pollock and all that stuff. I do get it. I do. But I feel like you can get some good work done in the afternoon. I think the main thing comes down to just like, again, the quality work. They got a lot of sports scientists in that building and knowing how to make sure everything works. But I think it becomes like a preference with some head coaches. Some coaches like to implement that toughness of the early morning workouts, and some guys like to lean into the sports scientists and go in the afternoon and kind of go with a more boosted morale. So guys are working a little heavier. So, I mean, I don't really have a judgment. I mean, if I was playing, I would opt for the afternoon workouts and shorter spring ball. But I think Matt Rule brings up a great point, and it's going to be interesting to see how open and what kind of spring ball you're going to have, because it is a time for other schools to recruit and see where players are. And we talk about that developmental swing, and you're just trying to track guys. And if you want to retain your assets and not get poached, you might want to hide them. Something that's a pretty common occurrence that happens in preseason NFL games, when there's guys that are good that they want to put on their stash on their practice squad, and they don't want another team to see them. Like, they won't play them in the last games, So it's some gamemanship. So it's going to be interesting to see which staffs approach it which way.
And I think there's plenty of Penn State fans that are hoping a Jeremiah Smith-esque wide receiver will fall from the sky following the college football playoff, following the spring portal window.
Those don't fall from the sky.
Those, if anything, how shallow the transfer portal talent pool has been in this past cycle and what we'll see in the spring is because all these teams are figuring out how to lock up their players. They're paying people now to stay. And if they're leaving, they're going to the NFL draft. But like the Keon Coleman situation of a few years ago, Michigan State to Florida State, those are anomalies, and they're getting lesser and lesser.
For sure.
A couple other coaching staff movements for Penn State, and this one you could speak to specifically, having been a recruiting coordinator for Penn State at once upon a time. Khalil Ahmad was the recruiting coordinator for Penn State personnel and recruitment, was his official title. He is leaving to join Temple's staff as a, quote, high-ranking front office member. What does Khalil Ahmad's departure mean to you?
To me, I mean, it's just growth. I think anytime you see staff members and coaches taking other jobs where they're moving up, whether it's from the perception of the school or just the title and responsibility, it's a beautiful thing for their personal careers, but it just overall for Penn State, it just shows that they're in the right space. Anytime that you survey or audit any staffs or championship teams, there's always mass departures because everybody wants a piece of that wedding sauce. And when you're one of those places, it's a good sign. So kudos to him and, the new industry of a front office college. It's cool to see him get an opportunity.
Last but not least, this was recently a few weeks ago, but Rob Smith has left Penn State football and is now going to become a co-defensive coordinator and play caller for the Scarlet Knights. Normal churn of the offseason. This is his third stint ultimately at Rutgers, but had an opportunity as an analyst for Penn State this past season. Seems like those analyst consultant roles, those are the ones where you're now seeing the real churn in college football. And if you're really lucky, like Penn State has been, like James Franklin has been, lucky, yes, but strategic is probably more so the descriptor there. If you can keep your position coaches, you're doing a great job. Your analysts, your consultants, that's the one that's going to turn over every year.
Or even better, have your analysts turn into your position coaches. I think he's been doing that with like Deion Barnes and Dan Connor. So you keep everything in house. That's the Baltimore Ravens philosophy.
That's the goal. A lot of movement with Penn State's coaching staff. Winter workouts are not far away. Lessons for a lot of people that are happy to hear that, like Justin King, who just want to sleep in. Like, why would you want to work out at 5 o'clock in the morning? Just like enjoy yourselves. Winter workouts are on the corner. We'll see what the spring game will be in April, but that's a long ways off. For everything in between, stay tuned with us right here on State of State. Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Follow us on social media at State of State Pod. Comment on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. For just 99 cents a month, you can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast. State of State is presented by BetOnline and by Blue White Outfitters.